Welcome to FEMTECH Live Lounge, a monthly discussion that celebrates the intersection of technology and the AI industry. This series is presented by Virtual Patent Gateway. Today's interviewer is Shruti Chopra. Shruti is counsel in Linklater's TMT/IP and data solutions practice in New York. She specializes in providing comprehensive counsel on transactions involving intellectual property and technology across diverse industries. Joining Shruti is Coreena Brinck, a UK chartered and European patent attorney who splits her time between a practice at 2IP and in-house as head of IP at an artificial general intelligence startup. And with that, I'll pass things over to Shruti.
Thanks so much, Caitlin. It's always odd when someone else is introducing you. So, Coreena, you're the star of this 30-minute show that we have going on, and I'd love for you to introduce yourself and the path you've taken to get here.
Okay, well, it's a bit like yours, actually. I didn't originally think I'd end up in IP or in the law. I had a huge interest in physics that's when I first started out as a sort of, undergraduate. I did physics and astronomy, and I went from there, and I actually went to CERN in Switzerland, where I looked at particles and physics, and did some programming basically to look at how, beams, in fact, were sort of these particles were going around the ring. I don't want to get too technical here because I might intimidate some people. Basically, that was fascinating, and I decided when I came back I wanted to do some more theoretical physics. So I went off to Cambridge University, and I studied applied mathematics and theoretical physics there in something that's called Part 3 Maths, which was very challenging and very interesting to do. And then after that, took a year off, and I went off to America, and I did a bit of coding. Then I came back, I started my PhD, and this time I was looking at space physics. And I sort of thought I'd be looking all sorts of things. And then I realized actually, my supervisor left due to various reasons. I needed to sort of regroup my approach. And I ended up doing a computational sort of modeling PhD. And that really gave me a lot of, understanding about technology. This was only just post-internet days. I was in Switzerland when they actually sort of kick-started the World Wide Web. It was back in 1992. Oh, wow. And they actually said to me, we've got this new way of sharing information. And I was like, oh, God, it's a bit slow.
Oh, God.
And I thought it was great, but we had things in academia. We used to do things called file transfers and all sorts of things like this where you'd fetch files. So it was great, but of course there wasn't any multimedia. There wasn't anything like this with live video streaming. None of that really. That all came when I was doing my PhD, and we started to see sort of, websites really kicking off and taking off. And then after I did that, I decided, well, what am I going to do next? And when I was an undergraduate, I'd done something to do with patents. And again, pre-internet days, I worked for a small firm where the director who was retiring kept his patents in the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet. And they were brought in emergency. So,
That's amazing.
And we think that's how much things have changed in the last, 25 odd years or whatever it is. And my task, because he brought this new computer software, which was very exciting, was to write up all about these patents and put it into his little database so that when he fully retired, everybody would be able to find the right sort of documents, etc. And that was very interesting. And I did that as part of the Shell Technology Program, in fact, in London, and won a prize for it. And then went on, did my sort of, maths course, went off, did my PhD. And then at the end of my PhD, realized I didn't really want to stay in academia. And it was sort of, what could I do at this point? So my PhD had been in space physics. As I mentioned, I looked at data that came back from Ulysses as it was going around the Jovian magnetosphere. And of course, that's not very practical when it comes to a lot of technology. But actually, the fundamental physics was a bit like something called transmission line theory, where you're looking at the way signals propagate point to point on wires. And so when I applied to various patent attorney firms, I was very lucky that I found one that would take me on in London. And of course, this was just when mobile phone technology was really taking off. And mobile phones back then were still the size of a handbag, or a large brick, not they were getting smaller.
They were heavy. They were
They were
heavy.
heavy. And
Yeah.
they were analog. They were hackable, as so many celebrities found out. I don't think I had ever anything that interesting to say, but it was, I saw this technology and I realized just how much it was going to change so many ways in which we actually live our lives. And from there, I went from private practice, I went into industry, and I worked for a Canadian firm called Nortel Networks. And they had a very, I think, avant-garde for its time way of viewing their portfolio. They saw it as a sort of, an asset base. They were very keen to license it. And eventually, and because of the sort of what was called then the dot-com bubble, they went bust. Yeah. And so what happened after that is their IP is actually probably what's going to fund my pension at some point, and a whole load of other ex-employees. And I have a big thanks to somebody who's one of the sort of instigators in the UK to really leverage it, because they auctioned the IP off, and the patents basically saved the pension fund for the employees. And it just goes to show, we talk about patents, but we really forget the human benefit that they have. It's not just about helping people access the latest technology quicker, because of course if you file an application you can often share technology and discuss it, and of course this links into your side of the transactional side of things. But what I do is really help people understand the potential value of what they do, both in terms of their commercial strategy, their IP strategy, but also how they can sell that story to investors. And that's sort of fascinating to do, to see sort of smaller firms grow. So I stayed, basically, I went from Nortel to British Telecom, and from British Telecom, I handled a whole range of things, including things like virtual reality. And it's where I first came across AI patents, in fact. And then I went on and I worked for Nokia Technologies. And this was just after they'd been branded, I think it was something like a burning platform by their CEO. And everybody's like, why are you going there now? And it was like, well, actually, it's interface technology. And all these phones are useless unless the users can access that technology. So what's under the hood is brilliant, but if you can't access it. And I'm conscious of time, but to sort of wrap things up, I did a lot of work there on sort of analyzing, are these patents being infringed? Can we maybe improve them? Supported litigation activities by doing sort of, assessments of sometimes prior art and were the patents strong enough, and the sort of as a background person for their licensing and litigation teams who are excellent. And moved on for that, thought I need to do something different. I'd actually had a bit of an accident. Unfortunately, I had a cycling accident. I thought, I can't do all this travel. So I was headhunted by a startup, which wasn't quite the right fit for me. And then I went into private practice, which I loved, because suddenly I was seeing things like quantum technology, which I hadn't seen anywhere before in my particular area of tech. And I was seeing so much more AI come through. And I was actually working with some of the great ladies I used to work with when I was at Nortel, and they're still going strong. They lead up one of the sort of, in my opinion, better London practices. Then I was headhunted by another firm, and then I decided again, after another accident, unfortunately, where a car hit us, that actually I needed to step back and diversify my role. And now I'm really lucky, because I work part-time in-house for a fantastic startup. What they're doing is incredibly innovative. It's a new brain model. It's a different type of AI completely. It addresses a lot of the issues that people are seeing at the moment with generative AI training and plateauing, etc. I'm not going to go into that, because they're still in the stealth mode, although they'll come out soon. And the other side, I work in private practice. So again, I get the opportunity to help people, to work in a diverse area of fields. And it's been such a rewarding career. So that's how I got here, which is a bit long-winded and convoluted, but it's
fascinating though.
Decades, so.
No, it's fascinating.
And you have a similar story, although maybe not quite so roundabout.
It's similar in the sense that it can be long-winded as well, but where it differs is physics is what got you here. The lack of interest in physics is what got me here. So I guess physics had a role to play in both our careers. I always thought I would do engineering, and then I would just go to business school, and the traditional path a lot of South Asians end up taking. It's that or medicine. I hated blood. I hated biology. So it was very much, physics. And I realized very quickly, as I was kind of in my schooling years that I actually don't like physics. I'm good at it, but because I was good at studies, but I didn't actually care for it. And I realized I couldn't really be an engineer if I didn't care for physics or enjoy it.
Yeah.
And that kind of opened up this whole idea of what else can I do. And I used to debate a lot and used to do a lot of quizzing, Model U, and things of that nature. And I realized that the one thing I grew up in Mumbai, and so the one thing I was randomly very passionate about as a kid was anti-piracy. I hated the fact that
Oh
movies
yeah.
and books were pirated, and I used to save all of the pocket money I got or the birthday money I got, and used to buy original DVDs and books and gift them around. And I realized that maybe IP law was a good match for that passion of mine when you kind of plugged it in with what I was good at when it came to studies. And that's kind of how I ended up in law school, with the idea of being a media and entertainment lawyer and fighting this fight against piracy. I kept with that. My first job out of law school was in that space. But then I realized that it can also be very monotonous because you're fighting the same fight every day.
Yeah.
And you don't really have that diversity of experience. And so that got me to doing more transactional law, transactional deals, different types of structures, from joint ventures to M&A to licensing. And I found that was a great way to leverage my interest in IP, but still have a very broad practice, and be able to work with multiple different industries, multiple different teams, and kind of keep that going. And I've been doing that ever since. And so it's fun to kind of be at the forefront of it. You're on the forefront of it, when you're seeing the patents being filed, the technology is coming up. And for us, on the transactional side, it's really seeing where the money is, what people are
Yeah.
leveraging, what's being exploited, what can be commercialized, what's getting investment, what's finding a difficult time finding investment. And so you're able to kind of see where technology is heading, and the industries where it's first being used and where it's more useful than the others. And that's always a fun thing to do, right? Which kind of gets me to something you said when we were chatting on Monday about how AI used to be a more academic concept, versus now when it's absolute, it's a buzzword, it's mainstream. Your career's been a little bit like that as well. You started so academic, and then you've been to British
Exactly.
Telecom, Nokia. So walk me through how you've seen AI change.
Oh my God. Well, when I started out, the biggest shock I had going from my PhD into a law office was the amount of paper, because I was used to working even then with, everything was on a computer. Yes, you wrote up your PhD thesis even back then on a computer. It was a bit clunky, but it worked and it did the business. But then suddenly going into a London office, and it was one of the more advanced ones, and seeing, oh yes, they did have computers, but they were for the secretaries, and they were secretaries, and I was like, oh, okay.
Oh, wow.
And it's like, you were expected. And my husband's also a patent attorney. He said when he started around the same time, the firm he was at, it was like, you just dictated. He didn't have the luxury of a piece of paper.
Oh, I remember
do you remember?
The recorders? My senior partners have had those.
And I remember one firm I went into, it was way more avant-garde. They said, oh yes, this is when I was a trainee. Yes, no, they would let you have access to a computer, but it was one computer between two trainees, and the desks were back to back, and they would flip the computer and pass the keyboard over.
Like just the screen was revolving?
Exactly. Yes. No, they turned the screen round. It was on a little pivot.
That's almost fun though.
It was fun. And I think it's quite innovative. And I you just forget, we take, these days it's like your mobile phone is quite a powerful computer. It's way more powerful than computers were back then. We have laptops, I work with about 3 large screens and half a dozen laptops and things. We use so many different tools. I remember thinking, I think it was when I was doing my PhD, and the guys in the lab I was in, they were all programming levels of a game called Doom, and they go around, you can shoot everything in sight. It was brilliant fun. And I used to build computers back then as a hobby, it's out of date, let me pieces and rebuild it. And I wouldn't have a clue where to do that now. I think I struggle with a Raspberry Pi probably these days, except I haven't really got the time. So maybe I actually read the manual, probably get that. But it's the technology's become very specialized. We still need to have fundamental learning. It's really important for people in the legal profession to keep up to date with modern trends. And one of the interesting things I've seen is this sort of crossover from AI being technology that I handle, that my clients are developing, to suddenly being, oh wow, we could use these tools, let's find out more about them. And there's a huge sort of piece, because we have obligations towards our clients to maintain the integrity of their data and confidentiality. For us, it's not that we can sort of leap in, and in a private practice context I have a lot more freedom than I do in a private practice I have much less freedom than I do well, I can play around there a lot, and it's my own data. I know what I'm doing. I don't have to worry about transfer, learning from one client's if it trained and went to another. It's got to have zero data retention policy and things if you're doing anything professionally. But at the moment, until sort of I feel comfortable with those tools, fully comfortable, I don't really use them. I use AI, but nothing like generative AI in a private practice context. In-house, for the startup, I occasionally do, and I'm playing around and seeing what they can do. And the quality is interesting. I've been speaking to people about this week and last week in particular, and some people, and I have to agree with them, I think it's going to raise the game. What we're seeing now is the start of a real seismic shift. I think things like soft skills become more important. I think the way we work, we've already seen it since COVID. We're all sort of capable of working from home, in the office, on the move. And with that, there comes the piece, well, when do you switch off? Because technically, we're always available. But one of the things I really liked, and you've got this in the US in the patent profession, there was some guidance about the use of AI tools issued by the USPTO earlier this year.
That's right.
We don't have that guidance yet coming through in Europe. It will come, I think. And I think it's going to be very important, because I work with this sort of technology a lot, but I still don't work with as a patent attorney with these tools, and I'm sort of trying to sort of work out what are the right questions to ask. So we all have these questions about these tools. How can we use them to make us better at what we do? What will they improve? And I think a lot of it is they'll take away some of the drudgery, but we actually have to learn how to use them to bring the best out of them. I think a lot of people are very fearful of, what will happen to our clients if they start? Well, we are more than just AI systems. There's a lot of interaction. Sometimes it's about knowing the right questions to ask to get the information we need from the client to do what's going to be in their best interest. And so I think for anybody who's anxious about the use of AI tools, I think as long as people are aware how to use them to improve what they do, they're great. But you have to invest time to do that, and I think that's one of the nice things in a way that sort of this VP Live Lounge does, is we're having conversations about these tools. And I hope that for anybody who's listening in, thinking of starting a career in IP, our careers will not go just because there are AI systems, at least not, I think, in the near future, but what we do will probably be quite different, I suspect, in about 10 years time, and it will be a different skill set possibly.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? The way I always approach it is use it as an aid, not a replacement. And I think that's kind of where you need to head with this, is very much like when you had, LexisNexis or Westlaw kind of come in, and now suddenly you had an easier way to do research. It's very similar, where it's going to aid, it's going to make it faster. Your turnaround times might be impacted by it as well, in for the clients in a positive way. And that gives you more free time to do the upskilling, the soft skill building that you were just mentioning about. But I think when people start thinking that they can use it to replace their jobs and maybe take the shorter cut, I think that's when it starts becoming problematic. And now all of the big issues, particularly with generative AI, start to kind of come to fore, right? The one question I had is,
I agree.
No. The one question I had is, obviously you've seen a lot more of the technology changes that have happened both in our profession and just as IP lawyers than I have. But, I still remember when we were kind of doing floppy disks to CD-ROMs to pen drives and share links
yes.
now, right? And so there's been a lot of change, even small ones that have happened, but nothing where you could leverage a tool that was essentially doing a lot of the jobs that a lot of the trainees do, a lot of the
Yes.
junior lawyers do,
Yeah.
and where do you see that kind of coming, right? Because for me, yes, there's a lot of what AI can do today and AI tools can do today that we traditionally have used more junior attorneys to do. But those junior attorneys are eventually going to be the senior attorneys.
Exactly.
And AI is not, I don't think, in any time in our lifetimes, going to replace a lawyer's role at the most senior strategic advisory level. Uh, so, what's kind of the advice when you're trying to manage both those expectations, right? You need to train the trainees and junior lawyers to grow, but
Exactly.
you also want to leverage the tools available to you.
I think actually the people who are going to be most impacted by the use of AI tools will be trainees, not because of competition, but because I think their skill set will have to diversify. So instead of just being and it may make the roles more interesting for them.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, traditionally when you start as a trainee in a law firm, you come out of law school, you come out of and you start professional training on the job sometimes in the UK, or you may have an advanced degree in IP law. But basically, you go in and you're often struggling to understand some of the issues that more senior partners will be handling, and they may give you a very sort of narrow remit on a particular project. I think with the use of AI tools, providing the universities start to upskill those trainees so they know how to utilize them, their role could actually be to contribute more earlier on in their career. That's the way I would like to see this go. But with appropriate supervision. And I think, again, there'll be need to upskill the more senior attorneys so that they can work with trainees with these AI tools. So I see it as expanding our capability to engage with our work in a more holistic way, to get more satisfaction from it if it's done appropriately. If these tools, if you put the effort in and you get the quality out, I think it will improve professional standards, as you say. Can, in the right context, it can increase turnaround. Not necessarily so, because sometimes it gets it wrong. We obviously do very complex drafting. But I was speaking to somebody the other day, and she said, one of the things you can do is you can use it to test yourself. Because if you put into one of these generative models that is quite well configured, a rubbish set of claims, you'll see a rubbish diagram generated from them. And I hadn't really thought of this. And I was like, that's a fantastic point. And of course, this is something that when you're in my day, you were told to also link integers and not have to have anything float. But, it's another way of doing it. So I think, instead of, we're used to spell checkers. We don't complain about spell checkers anymore. I think, we will be used to working with AI assistants. I think, the problem with AI tools at the moment is the output, particularly in my area, can look plausible, but is actually incorrect. I mean, we've heard of AI hallucinations, and if it's wrong, it's wrong. You don't follow it. The danger, I think, and it will affect all areas of the legal profession, is when tools are used that haven't necessarily been appropriately tested and are targeting users who won't be able to assess whether the output is fit for purpose or not. I think that is, at a professional level, I do have concerns about that. But the rate at which these tools are improving, I'm sure that will sort of go away. But I think, it's important that in the meantime, users of the tools, and I've noticed now on ChatGPT, it's very clear. It does say, we get it wrong, and there's a little reporting button. So, these tools, I think, are not perfect, but we're just at the start of an amazing journey with them. And when you think about it, how mobile phone technology changed the world, suddenly their lifestyle is, we switch the oven on, adjust the central heating whilst we open the curtains, turn on the lights, and if you've got an electric vehicle, you can even start the car sort of before you're out of the door, or call it to come and collect you, so you don't have to walk too far in the rain. This is sort of the science fiction from when we were younger. And
Absolutely.
I think AI in the legal tech will have a similar, hopefully beneficial effect, because ultimately technology won't take off unless we use it to our benefit. Most people have to appreciate that it may change how we do things, but I think that change will have a very positive impact. And even when it comes to access to law, access to legal advice is often very expensive. These tools, I think, might have a democratizing effect by allowing people to legal advice at a level of ever been able to contemplate before in the past. Simply because you'll have lawyers, as you say, you might turn the work around fast in some areas, not all, but there could be that as an impact. So I'm quite positive. No, not all. And I don't think necessarily an IP actually in some areas as well, because there's a lot that goes on, but it will have, and anybody who's used these tools, the first few times you use them, you will spend a lot longer probably if you do it yourself. But I think people need to persevere and explore, and not necessarily use them in the way the originators have used them. If you find you can use a tool and it's great for X purpose, it's still a time saver. It's still beneficial to your practice. So
no, absolutely. I mean,
interesting times.
To me, it always comes down to this, right? Especially when we're talking about people just entering the legal industry, is I think half the battle is won when you're curious, particularly in what we do. Things are changing, and I think AI tools kind of falls at the top of that. Is if you're curious and you're willing to kind of not take that to be the final word, but to be a starting point and kind of dig deeper and have that be the first source of your curiosity. I think that's going to, as you said, give a lot of the trainees, younger lawyers, a larger role to play on in the legal industry, because they're not going to be so afraid to reach out, to ask questions, to find that information. And so I do think it can be a valuable assistant there as well. The one thing that, with technology, as we've seen, one of the biggest benefits is that technology has no boundaries, right? You generally have something in one jurisdiction that's available in the others. You really have to go to a large extent of geo-blocking something to not be able to use it in a different jurisdiction. IP laws, over the many decades, have had many international treaties that have tried to keep up with that premise, that innovation can happen, in multiple different countries and can have impact in multiple different countries. So let's not make IP laws so drastically different globally that it's going to be a challenge from a use and enforcement perspective. How does that play in with AI? Because if there's one thing that we're seeing right now, is that the laws are jurisdictionally very different, and there's no real harmony in how one patent office or one government is approaching use of AI in industry. And so what are your thoughts on where that might be headed?
I think there is a need to respect the different laws. For example, in the US, you have a grace period. Here over in Europe, we don't.
Yeah.
And that actually is a piece to play around, whether you have an informed user or not, because you can only it's easier to fix a patent application that's gone wrong, for example, in the priority year, at least, if you have a grace period available. You still may have problems, but in Europe, you may find that you just don't have any rights that you can legally enforce if it's really done badly. And I think some of these tools need to adapt and maybe appreciate their limitations. At least now, they may go away, but I think that's important. I think when it comes to patent attorney use of these tools, different sets of guidance are needed to respect that different environment, because the tool may be the same. I mean, obviously, a lot of these tools originally, they were US practice focused, and now they're differing. I think we're almost out of time. But I think what's going to be interesting is to see how more of them now adapt towards European practice, because that will help with uptake in Europe. And I think it's very important. And I think we're out of time. I've just seen that.
So thank you so much, Coreena, for this very fascinating chat. I've had a great time. The 30 minutes did fly back. And thank you, FEMTECH Live Lounge, for having us today. I hope everyone who listened in and may listen to this in their own time enjoy this conversation as much as we did. Thank you so much.
Yes, and thank you, Shruti. It was lovely to chat to you. I wish we'd had a bit longer. So
thanks so much.